farming of crops usually involves a monoculture. And a monoculture means the removal of all other species of vegetation just to grow that one crop. Now, when you only have one species and that species is in abundance, then you're going to get an increase in the organisms that actually eat that particular food source. So you have an increase in pests. So if that's left unmanaged, the yield of the crops might be reduced by up to 50%. So for that reason, farmers really need to manage the pests around their crop. So what can they do? Firstly, they can use pesticides. So pesticides are chemicals that are toxic to the pests. Now, the problem, of course, with pesticides is that they are often indiscriminate. They don't just damage the pests, but those toxins can remain behind and be washed off down into waterways and run off and contaminate other areas. They can remain on the crop, and so they affect the people that eat the crop. So there's some issues, of course, with pesticides. Other ways that farmers can manage these pests, one of them is through farming practices. For example, they can lay mulch and other covering to cover and smother vegetation pests like weeds, etc. They can do companion planting. So companion planting means that you grow, say, sacrificial plants or plants that produce certain chemicals and aromas, etc., that repel the natural predators. There's also laws, so the governments are heavily involved in trying to control pests, and specifically the spread of pests. So there's control of what fruit and vegetables can be taken across borders. There's the rabbit fence, etc., and there's laws that you can't have rabbits in Queensland. All of these things are laws to try and reduce pests damaging crops. Another important one that's becoming more important is genetic engineering and the production of genetically modified organisms. So perhaps producing organisms, crops that are naturally resistant to the pests. And then, of course, another one is biological control. So biological control is the use of a pest's natural enemy to control the pest numbers. So that enemy might be a predator, it might be a pathogen, or it might be a parasite. So whatever is the natural enemy of that species can be introduced to be used. Now, sometimes biological control has some bad press. You'll recall, of course, the disaster of the cane toad. The cane toad was introduced into Queensland to control the cane beetle. The trouble is, it wasn't well tested before it was introduced into Queensland. And as you know, now the cane toads have spread all the way down into New South Wales and out west as well. And the reason for it is because in their natural country they did eat the cane beetles, but when they moved out to Australia, they realised there was so much more that they could eat, and there's no natural predators for the cane toad in Queensland. So subsequently their populations have increased significantly, and the populations of the things that they eat have been negatively affected. So biological control can work very nicely, but there's some considerations for it. Firstly, we need to have a look at our population predator-prey growth curve. So remember how we say that the population of the prey goes up and then it oscillates like this. And of course the predator population is lower and it's delayed. So we see this sort of curve. Now, this one here, the prey, is actually the pest, and the predator is the biological control. So by introducing the biological control organism, we want to be reducing the pest population. For a successful biological control, we obviously need to make sure that it reduces the pest population, but we want to make sure that it doesn't totally eradicate the pest population, because if it totally eradicates it, that means that there's no food for our biological control, and it then is going to be eradicated as well, and then you have to restart it. So what you want is a low level of your biological control organism to remain behind just in case there's an outbreak again of your pest. So we want to decrease the pest population but not eradicate the pest totally. We want to make sure that the biological control is well tested before release, because once you release it, that's it. There's no going back. You can't remove it. So you've got to make sure that it's well tested. We want to make sure that it's specific. That means that it is going to target and predate the specific pest organism that we're trying to control, and it's not going to harm or affect other organisms. And that was one of the problems with the cane toad. There were so many other organisms that the cane toad wanted to eat. So biological controls can be very, very effective as another way of farmers controlling pests in a monoculture. It does need some, it needs to be well tested before it's released, and it needs to make sure that it meets some certain criteria. But if that occurs, then it's a very helpful program that farmers can have. And ultimately, by doing that, it reduces pesticide use. And of course, reducing pesticide use is a real benefit, because pesticides can be a problem with biomagnification further down or further along the food chain, and also remotely from where they're applied as well, because of runoff, because of being taken up into ecosystems and bioaccumulation.